right, so today we're going to be covering the VCU School of Medicine in Richmond, Virginia. And we actually have Mike. He's one of my good buddies from college as well. We TA'd cell biology together, so I'm glad to have him on here. Three of the really exciting things that he touched on that just to get you excited for the show. One being the fact that you can do a 3-year program track at VCU, going into residency at VCU just in 3 years of medical school. Another thing that I think you might find interesting is they have a post-bac program that gives you the opportunity to interview at VCU, and Mike will talk about that. Finally, they have a lot of structure and opportunities to just get a lot of support in the way that their class is divided up. And Mike will go in depth in a lot of these things, and he will be joining now. Hi, welcome, Mike, to the Medical School Index. Today we're covering the Virginia Commonwealth School of Medicine, or VCU. Mike, you want to tell us a little bit about the name of the school? Apparently there's some confusion there.
Yeah, well, first of all, Mark, thanks for having me. So good to see you. So VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, it's a relatively new name for the school. It used to be called the Medical College of Virginia, or MCV, and so you still hear it called that by a lot of the locals. Because originally it was just a medical school. It's been around since like the 1830s or something like that. But relatively recently, I'm not quite sure, but sometime in the last 50 years or so, they decided to start an undergraduate program. And with that, they felt the name, the Medical College of Virginia, wasn't so applicable to the school anymore. So they changed the name to Virginia Commonwealth University, or VCU.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I actually worked with a guy who, I just remembered this. He went to VCU as well for medical school, and he did one of those like 4+4 programs. Do you have any people in your class that did like the undergraduate that it's like guaranteed you'll get into med school?
We don't have any undergrads that are this fast track to med school. There is a program that you can do like a post-bac here where they do guarantee you an interview slot. And so a lot of the students that I know in my class are people who decided to come to medical school maybe a little bit later. And so they didn't complete all those med school requirements during their undergrad. So they came back, they did the post-bac at VCU, got some research experience in, got that interview and went on their way. In fact, I also know a lot of students who did that same thing and then ended up at medical schools all across the country. But I know that we have a good chunk of them here in my class right now.
Okay, cool. So that probably increases your likelihood just due to the fact that they know you and you get an interview, but doesn't guarantee you'll get in. A lot of people went elsewhere.
Certainly. I know some people, unfortunately, who didn't get in, but I know that overall it's a program that has a really good success rate, not only at VCU, but in other institutions as well.
Super interesting. So you worked with them, like the medical students, because you just went, to give some background, Mike went straight from undergrad to VCU. So you, as a medical student, interacted with these students, it sounds like.
Yeah. So some of them are in my class, and I interviewed with some of them, and I met them there. I've met them since. But on top of that, there's another program that I volunteer with here at VCU where we get paired with some of them to be like a mentor-mentee kind of relationship. Just someone that they can ask questions about VCU, about med school in general, and going through that process. And so I've had 2 mentees that I've worked with through that program who were doing their post-bac, who I was just a resource for them to ask any questions that they have as they went through preparing for the MCAT or writing their applications, things like that.
That's super cool. And so is this like a master's of biomedical sciences, or is this like a master's of public health, or do you have options there?
From what I understand, it's not a master's program. It's just a post-bac. So you just get like a certificate. It's not an actual degree. And I think it's pretty accelerated. I know that you do it over a course of a few months. And a lot of the lectures are actually the same lectures that we have at the School of Medicine. So I know a lot of them come in pretty well prepared for the first, those didactic years of medical school, because a lot of the content is the same lectures that they heard during that post-bac program.
Yeah, it seems like a good opportunity. It seems like a lot of schools are doing that. I know the school I'm going to be attending is doing like a master's of biomedical science. And it seems, I'm not sure if you're guaranteed an interview, but it seems like it. And then I know the University of Utah, they just started one of those programs as well. So Very interesting. That was kind of an aside, but so VCU is in Richmond, Virginia, which I've heard nothing but good things about Richmond. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the area?
Yeah, we love Richmond. It's it's a really interesting city with a lot of history. I like you, I'm from Utah, so I'm used to the mountains and the desert. But here it's just all green and it's beautiful, which we've loved. Except for the pollen, that's okay. You can take a little Claritin and get through that. Oh. Um, but yeah, the city itself is beautiful. We're right by the James River. So a lot of my classmates will go, rafting on the weekends there. We're not too far away from Shenandoah National Park. There's lots of great hiking in the area. A little fun fact that I always like to share with people about Richmond is besides San Francisco, it has the most locally owned restaurants per capita of anywhere in the United States. So what that means is you just get a lot of these little mom and pop stores with lots of really good food from all across the world. So a little bit of everything here in Richmond. It's not the biggest city, but we like it a lot.
That's super cool. And I've never been to Virginia, but I've heard like it's got kind of a cool small town vibe to it if you're outside of DC. And it looks like there's about like 200,000 people who live there. So it's like a good sized city, but not too big. So that's pretty cool.
I'd say so. It's not the biggest city, but it certainly isn't, a small little town either. And to your point, Washington, D.C. is only a 2-hour drive away. And we do that drive all the time just to go check out the Smithsonian's and other things up there.
Very cool. Gives you a lot to do.
Absolutely.
So is Richmond a pretty safe place to live? Or, I mean, every city has its parts, but.
Yeah, I would say, everything's really relative, right? And a lot of it really depends on where in the city you live. I'm married and have two young boys. And so we decided to live a little bit further away from downtown, not so much for safety reasons. Downtown's generally a pretty safe area, actually. But we just wanted to live more out in the suburbs just to give us better access to parks and open green space and things like that. But there certainly are parts of town that maybe are, a little bit less safe. But I think that's all relative.
Okay. So overall, it's great. And
I'd say so.
The class size, it looks like it was about like 180 from what I read online.
Yeah, that's, I think, what we started with. I think we lost a few students. And then I think we picked up a few students on the way as well. So I think we're about 180.
Okay, cool. So do they divide like into sections? I know a lot of, because it's a relatively bigger class size. My school has a bigger class size as well. Do you kind of like divide into like groups, or how does that work?
Yeah, we do. So the class of 180 is split up into 4 societies, and you are kind of divided into that right at the beginning of medical school, and you stay in your society all 4 years. There's like a guy or there's some faculty member that will be assigned as kind of the head of that society. Feels a little bit like the Hogwarts houses, I guess. And so you'll spend your entire 4 years kind of associating with people in your society. And there are little smaller groups that are broken apart or broken off of that, like inside of that society as well.
Okay. And you kind of interact with that group more, and that faculty members like your mentor, or how does that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is great about VCU is the fact that you have a lot of people who are assigned to you. There's a lot of built-in mentors that you're given. So you have someone who is in charge of that large society, and they're usually in charge of more, I would say it's more of a social function. They're always throwing parties, at least the professor who's in charge of my society. He's always throwing parties and trying to get people out to his house and things like that. But then inside of that society, you'll have a bunch of other groups for different activities. And we can get into that in a second if you'd like. But each of those has another faculty member that's assigned to them as well. All of them are physicians from a wide variety of specialties. So it gives you an opportunity to meet and to work with people from lots of different paths of medicine.
Okay, cool. And those groups, do you choose those groups?
No, so those are all assigned to you. So I think a lot of it is random. I know that the very beginning of our medical school education, we were assigned to smaller groups that we would work with for that first semester, that we would do certain educational activities with, certain like problem-based learning. And that was based on like the Myers-Briggs personality test, where
Interesting.
they had everyone take that, and then they found what they felt like was going to be good pairings, and they put you into these little table groups, and that's who you work with for that first semester. And then after that, each semester, they switch the groups around just so that you would have a chance to meet and work with more individuals, still all within the same society. So you're still seeing the same faces, but it gives you an opportunity to work closely with, a new group of people.
Wow, that's super interesting that they use the Myers-Briggs. Really interesting. So there's about what, like 10 people in each group, and there's 4 groups per society approximately?
It's a little bit smaller than that. My first semester, a lot of it was over Zoom. And so to keep things simple, they kept it at groups of like 3 to 4, because we were doing everything over Zoom breakout rooms. Once we were able to get back in person, the way that VCU's medical school is set up is we have a large theater that we can attend lecture in, but most of our lectures are done in these really big floors with small tables of 5 chairs. And each table has a little monitor attached to it that shows the lecture, as well as a monitor for you to plug your laptop in and share your screen with everyone at your table. And so the point of that is that you sit in your table group with the other 4 individuals, so 5 of you in total. And that's who you attend class with. That's who you do group quizzes with. And so, yeah, the group size is kind of dictated by the fact that a table is 5 chairs.
That's nice. Very nice that you can kind of have sounds like a lot of built-in support systems. So another thing I noticed too, just things specific to VCU, I noticed that VCU seems to be pretty friendly to out-of-state students. Has that been what you've seen?
Oh, absolutely. I myself am an out-of-state student. I would say about half of my class is out-of-state. VCU is a state school, and so we certainly have a lot of native Virginians, but there's a large portion of our class that comes from out-of-state, specifically a lot from California. In California, it's hard because there's so many people who want to go to medical school, and there's only a certain amount of UC schools. But I know that VCU really loves their Californians, and they've been great to a lot of other people from out of state as well.
Very cool. And I know that there's like tuition differences. Is there opportunity to qualify for in-state tuition after like a year or something like that?
Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult than that, but there is an opportunity to qualify for in-state tuition after having lived here for a year. The out-of-state tuition is about $60,000, whereas in-state is about $30,000. I know students who have successfully appealed and been able to transfer over to that in-state tuition. I went through that process and unfortunately was rejected, but for every person that's rejected, I've heard of one that's accepted. So their criteria is you essentially have to prove that the reason that you're in Virginia isn't for the sole purpose of attending medical school. And how you go about that, I'm not quite sure. But a lot of people who maybe have family connections to Virginia or who have previously worked in Virginia or done school in Virginia, I know have a lot of success in applying. So if you have connections to Virginia, even if you're not considered like an in-state Virginian, I would recommend looking at VCU because they can be pretty accommodating in terms of getting you into that in-state category for tuition payment.
That's cool that they have that opportunity. We're all trying to weasel our way into the in-state tuition. I can relate.
Absolutely.
Well, anyway, so getting kind of more into the first 2 years. So Mike just finished his basically first 2 years. He's starting clinical rotations basically today, actually. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the first 2 years in general terms of like, how was your first year laid out? And then was there like a break in between your first and second year? And then when do you take step?
Sure. Yeah, I can give that general timeline. So I started M1. It was, I think the last week of July is when we kicked things off, and we had a few weeks of orientation and got into class, like real class, probably about mid-August. And we went through, had our winter break, and then continued on until about mid-May. In fact, I know that M1s currently are taking their last test this Friday, to give you an idea. So we're recording this on May 16th. So sometime around mid-May is when first year wraps up. Then you have a summer break. It used to be shorter, but with the move to pass fail in step one, faculty decided that some of the material could be condensed a little bit. We didn't need to spread things out as much, just not trying to pack in as much dedicated time for step one. And so we were the recipients of a new longer summer break, which was great. So we ended about mid-May, and I think we came back the first week of August. We did classes all the way through December, had a winter break. Then we came back in January. In that last month of January was a really relaxed month. It was our last block. We just did it's a psych soc class that we took with some kind of more hands-on clinical stuff that we did to kind of wrap up second year. And then by the first week of February, we were off. And from February to April 25th was the date we are given. So end of April is the window that you're given to study for and to take step one. With it going to pass fail and the way that VCU has, VCU was super great at finding ways to help us prepare for step throughout our first 2 years. And so I know that most of my classmates, including myself, took it the first week of March or somewhere around then. So we had, we have 2 months of prep for step. Most people took it in a month. And what that means is that next month is just your time to do whatever you please. I know a lot of people in my class, since COVID restrictions were finally falling, took that opportunity to, travel, go to Europe, things like that. And then end of April is when we came back and started our transition to third year. And mid-May is when I guess our first rotations start. And so that's kind of brings you up to speed in terms of the overall timeline of where I'm at least.
That's very interesting. It's so nice that they give you that much time to prepare for step and that you finish so early. I feel like a lot of schools, they'll finish like the end of April and give you like May, maybe part of June. And then next thing you know, July, you're starting your clinical rotation. So that's definitely new age stuff. Good to hear that. And nice to have such a long summer break.
It was nice. That first summer I think it was 8 weeks for that first summer, which was very much needed and appreciated. And then another long break after step was also really nice. So yeah, can't say enough good things about that.
Yeah, that's super great. And are these all done in one location? Like, is everything done in Richmond the first 2 years?
Yes, everything is done in Richmond in the first 2 years. There's opportunities to go volunteer and do things in further outside areas. But in terms of our didactic experience, everything is done in Richmond.
Okay, great. And then getting a little bit more granular. So anatomy, did you guys have like a dissection lab or was it prosected? And was that just your first semester of medical school?
Yeah, in fact, so our anatomy experience, I think, is a little bit different from at least other students that I've talked to. One of the things that I really appreciated about VCU when I was interviewing here and talking to students is I asked them about their first semester, about anatomy and things like that. I had interviewed at other schools who, when I talked to students there, they kind of joked and it almost felt like they were hazing when they would say like, oh, that first class is going to be anatomy. It's going to kick your butt, Yeah. And something that I appreciated when I was at VCU interviewing is I asked them, how do you approach anatomy? And what they said is, we don't want to jump into anatomy that very first semester. It's one of the hardest classes you're going to take in med school. So why would we just throw that at you right at the beginning? Let's warm you up first. And so our very first semester doesn't deal with organ systems really at all. It's more just basic foundational science. They're classes that you probably already took in undergrad, but just to get everyone kind of at that same foundation. Things like biochem or genetics. We took a class on pharmacology where it wasn't so much about, memorizing every drug in existence, more just the science behind pharmacology. We did a little bit with bugs and drugs and microbiology class, and then we took a pathology class. And then once you came back from winter break from that first year, you start a systems-based approach as you go through the organ systems. And with each organ system, you have anatomy lab that's associated with that. So when you're studying the GI system, you have some anatomy labs that are based on the GI system. When you move on to the next section, when you're talking about, cardiology, then you have a cardiology lab that's associated with what you're talking about there, which I really enjoyed because that means that everything that we are learning was put into context. My experience was a little bit different though, because it was done during COVID. And so everything was done virtually over Zoom, which I am glad to say that VCU is no longer doing. They're doing some in-person stuff now, which I think is good. Our experience was as good as they could make it. But I'm glad that things are opening up a little bit more so that those students can have the in-person experience.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's a lot of people that we're interviewing on the podcast have had kind of a COVID experience. And so, but it's good to hear that, that was successful for you. And then as well, I like the not first semester. That's pretty unique to VCU, for at least from who I've talked to thus far. And nice that they do it in different sections. So, and do they allow students to dissect?
So in the past, yes. There were enough cadavers for everyone to be separated into small groups of about 4. And you would, dissect your cadaver throughout the semester. My semester, obviously with COVID, everything was done with pre-recorded videos where they would demonstrate the different dissections. Like I said, it wasn't an ideal experience, but I understand why they had to do it that way. I know now the current M1s, they're still having some issues getting back to full capacity. And so they're using prosected cadavers. But in the past, they've always done dissections. I can't comment on whether or not that the goal is to get back to that. But I think that is the hope, at least among a lot of students.
Okay. Sounds like things are kind of in flux there. So we'll wait on that. And then just wrapping up the didactic years. So, during that time, is there anything else that you would reflect on in terms of just like getting involved in activities at VCU, and then also just kind of like what your daily life was like? Was it super manageable? Sometimes I talk to medical students and they're like, oh yeah, first 2 years, so easy besides preparing for step. And then sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, like it took my life away.
Yeah, I guess I'll do my best to address both of those things. Getting involved, I think VCU, as I mentioned before, there's lots of small groups that they put you into. And I think one of the great organizations that we have is this thing called Project Heart groups. Heart stands for something that I've long since forgotten, but that's not important. The idea behind the group is that you are paired with a physician and a group of another 6 or 7 students. And that group is purely kind of for your mental and emotional well-being. And you meet together once every 6 weeks or so, or more often if you need the help. And the physician who's in charge of that group, they'll check in with you. They'll kind of see how things are going, what's hard, what's good. I remember at the end of my first year, my physician asked me, my Project Heart leader, she asked me, what are your plans for this summer? And I mentioned that I was looking to find research, but I haven't found anything yet. And the next day she emailed me with a research project that she wanted me to help her on. I know that other people who have reached out to their Project Heart group leaders have had similar experiences, or they've connected them with other volunteer research opportunities. But overall, I just really appreciate the fact that, we have these physicians who take time out of their schedule to make sure that our emotional needs and our mental needs are well taken care of.
Yeah, totally. That sounds super nice. It sounds like the support structure is just probably one of the best I've heard at VCU. And then just like your day to day, the first 2 years, was that like, how was that transition into medical school? And how was your daily life?
Yeah. Whenever people ask me about med school, I always say med school isn't hard. It's just fast. And so just making the time for things. I'm in a different experience than a lot of students being married and having children coming into it. But I found it really manageable. For us, a typical day, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to noon, we have lecture on whatever block that we're in. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned, first semester, that's going to be something like genetics or microbiology. Whereas your second semester, first year, or your M2 year, it'll be more like renal or cardiology or pulmonology, something like that. Mm-hmm. So you'll have those block classes from 8 a.m. to noon. And then in the afternoon, you'll have longitudinal courses. There we go. Took me a second try there. And those are those vary. We have a biostats class that we take. We have an ethics class that we take. We have another class called the practice of clinical medicine. It's probably called other things at other institutions, but I'm pretty sure everyone has a class similar to it. It's basically the class where you learn to do physical exams, learn to take a history, learn how the practical skills of being a doctor. We also have an ultrasound course that we take, and those are in the afternoons. You typically only have like one or two of those classes each week in the afternoon. So on average, in terms of like dedicated class time per week, you have those 20 hours of lecture in the morning. And I would say at most you have 6 hours of longitudinal courses in the afternoon in a week. More often than not, it's only 3 at most. Sometimes it's even less. So, about 20 to 26 hours of coursework per week. I personally never attended class in person. I always watched the recordings. Other people went in person, but there's a lot of flexibility to how you approach those 20-ish hours of material each week.
That's nice. So you can watch on record, maybe even watch on 2x speed if that's your thing, which is really nice. And that's still a thing. That's not just a COVID thing.
Yeah, that was something they did before COVID, something they continued to do, and something they plan on continuing as well.
Okay. And those other courses, do you have to go in person for those, I imagine?
It depends. Some of those are done where you can just attend them over Zoom. Some of them you have to attend live over Zoom. Some of them you have to be in person for. And then with our biostats class, in the past, they've always required in-person attendance, but they actually just changed it this last year. So that if you want to, you can just watch the recordings later, which is always nice when you're trying to squeeze in things that maybe seem a little bit more important than your biostats class.
Yeah, no, that's nice. And yeah, you can't probably teach ultrasound over Zoom. So that makes sense that you'd have to go in person.
For sure.
And are these classes pass fail, or is there a class rank? How is that divided up?
Yeah. So everything during your first 2 years is just completely pass fail. No quartile rankings, anything like that. During our third and fourth year, when you're doing your clinical rotations, they do use grades. The point of that is you kind of need something to put on your application for residency. But we just use a pass, a high pass, and an honors, are the 3 grades that you can earn on each clerkship. And I believe they do quartile rankings, but that's not something that they really release to the class. It's just something that you find out when you put your application together and it goes on your dean's letter. The point of that is they just don't want any, worrying or conflict inside of the class in terms of, muscling each other out, trying to get that top ranking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of moving into the clinical years, thanks. That was super clear. The clinical years. So I'm imagining that since it's a state school, there's like a big hospital in Richmond area there's like a pediatric hospital and a main kind of a adult county hospital that you're doing your rotations at.
Yeah. Let me backtrack real quickly and just say one other thing, and then I'll answer that question. Please. I just wanted to add on, I realized I forgot to say this, but another thing that I just love about VCU is how collaborative everything is. With the fact that we don't have these class rankings that are shared internally, they're just things that you find out at the end. Everyone's very willing to help one another. if someone puts together like a study guide that they think is particularly useful or helpful, that gets sent out to our class group me. So all 180 of us have access to it. If someone finds a YouTube video that they found particularly helpful on a certain subject, that gets shared. And so I really appreciate all the open communication that the class has. So I would be remiss if I didn't share that and say that VCU is a really collaborative environment that I really appreciate. Going on to your other question in terms of our hospitals, sorry to backtrack there.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Mike. Thanks.
Yes. So VCU Health is associated with VCU School of Medicine. And VCU Health covers the greater Richmond area. We're kind of the safety net hospital for the region. There are two major hospital systems in the Richmond area, but VCU is by far the biggest. And so right smack dab in the middle of downtown, we're just across the street from the Capitol building of the capital of Richmond, or the capital of Virginia, sorry. We have the School of Medicine, and that is attached by a bridge to VCU's main hospital. Okay. And then that itself is attached by another bridge over to the Children's Hospital. So those are all places that you can rotate and work in. And then there is smaller clinics that are also run by VCU, kind of scattered throughout the city. And then we also, as students, work a lot at the VA, which is on the other side of the river from the main VCU campus.
Okay, awesome. So pretty similar to most medical schools. And then is there any tracks in terms of like international or rural or anything like that?
Yeah, so there's two tracks that I'm aware of, neither of which I am doing, so I can't speak too much about either of them. But we do have a rural medicine track that I know at least one of my friends is doing that he really enjoys. And then there's an option that if you'd like to, you can actually, this isn't available to all specialties, but there is a track that you can do that allows you to graduate in 3 years instead of the 4 from VCU.
Oh, wow.
The caveat with that is that you commit to stay at VCU for your residency. So I have a guy that I worked with in one of my smaller groups who knew pretty early on that he wanted to do internal medicine, or at least something connected to internal medicine. And he applied to this program, and it's a really easy application. You basically, as long as you're passing all your classes in your first and second year, as long as you're getting good grades in your practice of clinical medicine class, they just accept you into a residency program right then and there. So, he at the end of his second year got accepted into a residency program, and he's going to do his third year with us. And then he's going to graduate by the time that we're starting our fourth year, and he's going to move on into internal medicine residency here at VCU. So I know a lot of students who are kind of interested in that idea that they could graduate from medical school in 3 instead of 4 years.
That is so nice. And I've read about a couple other schools that do that. Do you still get summers, or is it just kind of a fast track? It sounds like you have to decide after your second year, so it's probably the same timeline.
I believe that you have to start the application kind of the end of your first year, but he still had a summer with us. He took step one, the same time that we did. I think he had to come back a little bit early from that long vacation that we had, but only like a month. So I think he still had like a month of vacation. So basically he had an extra month before third year where he had to do some rotations and whatnot. But other than that, he's just going about third year the same way that we are, and then he'll just graduate next May.
That is awesome. I feel like a lot of people would be interested in that. Is that only available for primary care, or is that any residency offered at VCU?
I'm not 100% sure. I know that family medicine, it's available. I believe pediatrics, internal medicine. I think they just added emergency medicine. And I'm not 100% sure about this, but I believe that general surgery may offer that as well, but I'm not, like I said, I'm not very confident in that.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely a lot of the primary care specialties have that option.
That's very cool. I believe Penn State Medical School does that same thing. So nice to know that VCU has that option. Kind of jealous, honestly. But anything else on the clinical years that you would I guess, point out in terms of like the structure, the location, or just general knowledge for anybody that would be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we just started, so I don't have much wisdom to offer in terms of advice. Um, but I can kind of explain a little bit about how our third year works. We go through kind of the same standardized rotations that any medical school requires, with some opportunities for some electives mixed in there as well. Most of the rotations are done here in Richmond, but there are opportunities to get placed outside of Richmond. I know of some who go do their OB rotation at a place that's kind of near Virginia Beach. For the family medicine clinics, you can kind of get thrown anywhere outside of Richmond, and you do a lot of rural medicine for that. And if that is the case, then the School of Medicine will provide housing for you. And that's kind of what your third year looks like. Fourth year is a lot more flexible, with time for acting internships, time for away rotations, and then a good amount of time off for applying to residency. And in the past, they've budgeted almost a month of your time for traveling to do residency interviews. I think most people right now are still doing those virtually. But I know that fourth year is a very flexible period of time here.
That's super nice. So basically, I noticed they had an urgent care elective on the website. Does everybody do that, or is this if you want to?
An urgent care elective is not something that's required during our third year. I think that's something that may be an option during fourth year. I know that they are pushing right now to require, and well, there are some people who are pushing to make this change. There's some people who are pushing against it. So it remains to be seen what will happen. But there is talk of requiring some sort of urgent care elective during your fourth year. Whether that's in the urgent care or whether that's an emergency medicine setting. The idea is that they feel like that would be a good applicable skill, regardless of what field you're going into. There is some pushback there, so it hasn't been required yet, but that is something that they're considering from my understanding.
Okay, awesome. So it sounds like it's in the works. We're coming up on our time here, but do you want to just touch on a little bit on the extracurricular opportunities available at VCU in terms of research and volunteerism and leadership?
Sure. Let's go in that order. So what was your first one there?
Oh, research.
Research. Okay, let's talk about research first. Yeah, in my experience, a lot of faculty here are very open to getting you involved in research. Because it's associated with an undergrad institution, there is research to be done in kind of a more like wet lab setting. And in fact, there's a lab building that's not directly connected to the School of Medicine, but it's right next door. And so I know that some people will go over there and they'll work with the PhDs. My research has been a little bit more clinical. And I know that there's lots of faculty who are willing and able to get you on to those projects as well. And like I said before, you're going to get lined up with, I think it's like 4 or 5 physicians that are going to be assigned to you as different types of mentors right from the beginning. And if you're not interested in any of the fields that they're in, they usually have connections with people who are in the fields that you're interested in, and they're usually very willing to help get you connected with the right people. So yeah, research is something that's ongoing here. There's lots of people who are willing to get you connected and lined up with the right people. And in my experience, everyone's really nice and willing to accommodate your busy med school schedule.
That's super nice. Sounds like the general feel I'm getting from VCU is just that it's a very supportive community. And how about volunteerism?
Yeah, volunteerism, there's nothing really structured, but there are lots of opportunities that the School of Medicine promotes. Each week we have an email that goes out that includes lots of different groups from the community that are reaching out to the School of Medicine for asking for volunteers, essentially. For me, I volunteer with an organization called Jacob's Chance. It's an organization where we go out and just do activities with people with intellectual disabilities. A classmate of mine and we got involved playing buddy ball, where we'd go play basketball with them. or there's other activities to go hiking with them, or just to sit down and play games. And it's a great opportunity to get involved with people in the community who have special needs. There's a clinic that is run. It's a free clinic that VCU allows their med students to go and to work at, where you do a lot of the intaking and the triaging of patients. Mm-hmm. I've volunteered there a little bit in the past. It's a little bit difficult for me because it's quite near downtown, where the school. It's about 20 minutes from downtown where most of the students live. But I live about 20 minutes from downtown. So it's about a 45-minute drive for me to get out there. And with 2 kids, that's not something I can always do. But I do know it's I've loved working out there in the past when I've been there. And I know that there's a lot of students who spend significant amount of time out there as well. And so that's a free clinic in the community. But like I said, most of the volunteering comes through kind of seeking it out, but there are lots of places that are lots of opportunities to find out about people who are promoting volunteer opportunities.
Yeah, I imagine fairly large city. So there's a lot of opportunity there, I bet. And then leadership, do they have like groups that you can get involved with at the school and kind of become a leader there?
Yeah. So I'm sure this is very similar to lots of other schools out there, but we have lots of interest groups. Pretty much every specialty has an interest group, and every subspecialty has an interest group. I, for one, I'm part of the ultrasound interest group, and am working in the leadership there. Yeah, lots of clubs that get lots of great funding to do really cool activities through the school. And those are great for 2 reasons. One, to get that leadership opportunity, like you talked about, so that you have the opportunity to put on these events. But 2, it gives you an opportunity to really explore different fields. We have lunch lectures going on all the time, many of which provide free food, which is always great. I will admit I've gone to some lunch lectures just for the free food, but I end up learning something really interesting along the way. And so it's an opportunity to learn more about certain fields that maybe you hadn't thought or heard of before.
That sounds super interesting. That kind of leads me to my next question with the ultrasound group that you're involved in. Do they let students check out a butterfly ultrasound, or do they provide one to all students?
Yeah, so we don't have any like portable like butterfly ultrasounds like to take home or anything like that. We have lots of equipment that you can check out, but no portable ultrasounds. But we do have like a whole sim center that's decked out with lots of ultrasound equipment. And we'll go do trainings up there where people are able to sign up for times to go practice their scanning and things like that. And then obviously we have the ultrasound course that I mentioned before, where it's a more structured instruction on how to scan different parts of the body.
Okay, cool. And do they provide a laptop or like an iPad, anybody, or you just kind of choose what you would like to use for study purposes?
You choose what you want to use. In fact, I listened to one of your podcasts before and I heard that question asked, and something I realized I wanted to say is in the past, VCU had required you to have a Windows laptop. They said, if you want to use a Mac for your own study purposes, that's fine. But for the test taking, you have to have a Windows laptop. And so I went and bought a Windows laptop, and then they changed that policy actually halfway through my first year.
Oh, man.
I don't know if they're still promoting that at all, but if you hear from VCU that you have to, or you hear someone who went to VCU or something saying you have to have a Windows laptop, that is no longer the case, thankfully. So yeah, no equipment is provided, but no restrictions either.
Okay, great to have that insider knowledge. So just wrapping up, is there anything else that obviously we've heard a lot of great things about VCU. I'm jealous that you're there. That sounds like such a great school. Is there anything else that you would comment on VCU before we wrap up?
No, I think you've been accommodating to letting me ramble on and on about my school. I will say, VCU is a great institution. It also has a lot of things that it needs to work on. And I will say that one of the great things I guess I'll say about that, though, is that they are very open to student feedback. Curriculum is changing every year. And the reason that curriculum is changing is because students are making suggestions. And so, I would agree that it is a very supportive environment, and I'm grateful that they're making changes. If you do end up deciding to come to VCU, which I would encourage, don't expect a perfect institution, but expect an institution that's changing to fit your needs.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they're definitely cutting edge, and a lot of the people I've interviewed, I've been amazed at how their schools are moving towards new policies, new ways of doing things. And whereas the schools I was probably more familiar with when I was applying were more traditional and still probably are that way. But Mike, thank you so much for joining, and it's been great to see you.
You as well, Mark.